Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation is an 1844 work of speculative natural history and philosophy by Robert Chambers, published anonymously in England. It brought together various ideas of stellar evolution with the progressive transmutation of species in an accessible narrative which tied together numerous scientific theories of the age. Vestiges was initially well received by polite Victorian society and became an international bestseller, but its unorthodox themes contradicted the natural theology fashionable at the time and were reviled by clergymen, and subsequently by scientists, who readily found fault with its amateurish deficiencies. The ideas in the book were favored by radicals, but its presentation remained popular with a much wider public. Prince Albert read it aloud to Queen Victoria in 1845. Vestiges caused a shift in popular opinion which Charles Darwin believed prepared the public mind for the scientific theories of evolution by natural selection which followed from the publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859. For decades there was speculation about its authorship. The 12th edition, published in 1884, revealed officially that the author was Robert Chambers, a Scottish journalist, who had written the book in St Andrews between 1841 and 1844 while recovering from a psychiatric illness. Originally, Chambers had proposed the title The Natural History of Creation. No vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. Some of the inspiration for the work derived from the Edinburgh Phrenological Society, whose materialist influence reached a climax between 1825 and 1840. George Combe, the leading proponent of phrenological thinking, had published his influential The Constitution of Man in 1828. Chambers was closely involved with Combe's associates William A. F. Brown and Hewitt Cottrell Watson, who did much to spell out the materialist theory of the mind. Chambers died in 1871 and is buried in the grounds of St Andrew's Cathedral, within the ancient chapel of St Regulus. Publication. The book was published by John Spriggs Morse Churchill in London. Great pains were undertaken to secure the secret of the authorship from Churchill and the public. After Chambers completed each section, his wife copied the manuscript, because Chambers was well known in the trade. Alexander Ireland of Manchester delivered the manuscript to the publisher. Proofs were delivered by the printer, a Mr. Saville, back to Ireland, who forwarded them to Chambers. Chambers gave the secret to only 4 people: his wife, his brother William, Ireland, and Robert Cox. All correspondence to and from Chambers went through Ireland as intermediary. Content. Vestiges is highly readable, but not always easy to understand. James A. Second Introduction to the reprinted edition Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation, page C. The work puts forward a cosmic theory of transmutation as the natural history of creation, which we now call evolution. It suggests that everything currently in existence has developed from earlier forms: solar system, earth, rocks, plants and corals, fish, land plants, reptiles and birds, mammals, and ultimately man. It explains the origins of life by spontaneous generation, citing some questionable experiments that claim to spontaneously generate insects through electricity. It then appeals to geology to demonstrate a progression in the fossil record from simple to more complex organisms, finally culminating in man, with the Caucasian European unabashedly identified as the pinnacle of this process, just above the other races and the rest of the animal kingdom. It even goes so far as to connect man's mental reasoning power with the rest of the animals as an advanced evolutionary step that can be traced backwards through the rest of the lower animals. In this sense, the evolutionary ideas offered in Vestiges aim at being complete and all-encompassing. It contains several comments worthy of repetition in light of more recent debates, such as regarding intelligent design. For example, not one species of any creature which flourished before the Tertiary now exists, and of the Mammalia which arose during that series, many forms are altogether gone, while of others we have now only kindred species. thus to find not only frequent additions to the previous existing forms, but frequent withdrawals of forms which had apparently become inappropriate. A constant shifting as well as advance is a fact calculated very forcibly to arrest attention. A candid consideration of all these circumstances can scarcely fail to introduce into our minds a somewhat different idea of organic creation from what has hitherto been generally entertained. In other words, the fact of extinction, which can be observed in the fossil layers, suggests that some designs were flawed. From this, the author concludes, some other idea must then come to with regard to the mode in which the divine author proceeded in the organic creation. But the suggestion is not a mechanism, as Darwin would propose 15 years later. The author merely notes that a continually active God is unnecessary. How can we suppose that the august being who brought all these countless worlds into form by the simple establishment of a natural principle, flowing from his mind? Surely this idea is too ridiculous to be for a moment entertained. He furthermore suggests that this interpretation may be based upon corrupt theology. Thus, the scriptural objection quickly vanishes, and the prevalent ideas about the organic creation appear only as a mistaken inference from the text, formed at a time when man's ignorance prevented him from drawing therefrom a just conclusion, and praises God for his foresight in generating such wondrous variety from so elegant a method, while chastening those who would oversimplify his accomplishment. To a reasonable mind the divine attributes must appear, not diminished or reduced in some way, by supposing a creation by law, but infinitely exalted. It is the narrowest of all views of the deity, and characteristic of a humble class of intellects, to suppose him acting constantly in particular ways for particular occasions. It, for one thing, greatly detracts from his foresight, the most undeniable of all the attributes of omnipotence. It lowers him towards the level of our own humble intellects. Much more worthy of him it surely is, to suppose that all things have been commissioned by him from the first, though neither is he absent from a particle of the current of natural affairs in one sense, seeing that the whole system is continually supported by his providence. Following its publication, there was increasing support for ideas of the coexistence of God and nature, with the deity setting natural laws rather than continually intervening with miracles. It is perhaps for this reason that Origin of Species was accepted so readily, upon its eventual publication. On the other hand, the knowledge of the scandal and experience of the reaction of his scientist friends confirmed Darwin's reluctance to publish his own ideas until he had well-researched answers to all possible objections. Vestiges and Lamarck. No vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. James Hutton, The Theory of the Earth. The book argued for an evolutionary view of life in the same spirit as the late Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Lamarck had long been discredited among intellectuals by the 1840s, and evolutionary theories were exceedingly unpopular, except among the political radicals, materialists, and atheists. Charles Lyell had thoroughly criticized Lamarck's ideas in the second edition of his monumental work Principles of Geology. Thus, it was naturally tempting for some critics to simply dismiss Vestiges as Lamarckian. Chambers, however, tried to explicitly distance his own theory from that of Lamarck's by denying Lamarck's evolutionary mechanism any plausibility. Now it is possible that once in the exercise of faculties have entered in some manner into the production of the phenomena which we have been considering, but certainly not in the way suggested by Lamarck, whose whole notion is obviously so inadequate to account for the rise of the organic kingdoms, that we only can place it with pity among the follies of the wise.